A man by the well laughed. City boy thinks a flower will fix ghosts. You think you can plant a memory and tidy it away? Elliot fired back, the words flat as stone. He had come from the city with gloves and a list. Barely 20, trying to move with purpose. He set his knees at plot 14 because the village roster had his name there. From the gate an old man watched. Arthur Keene, 82, hands folded like a closed book. Villagers watched from porches. They did not cheer. A woman nodded once. A man spat and turned away. Elliot dug with a steady rhythm. The spade cut clean arcs. He kept his breath even to steady his hands. The spade struck metal with a bright wrong note. He cleared soil by hand and freed a dented tin, heavy with age. He prized the lid open, dust rising and settling like a held breath. Inside, folded small, was a photograph. 2 young men in uniform filled the frame, one with Arthur's jaw, the other smiling like apology. Elliot turned the paper in his fingers, as if handling a rumor. He felt a sharp private surprise, the kind that makes you pull your coat tighter. Plot 14 had been marked abandoned for years. No one came near it. No one spoke for it. Elliot rose and walked the short path to the porch, the photograph flat in his palm. He kept his steps low, so the village would not have reason to point. A child passed with a pail. An old dog padded by without interest. Arthur did not move. The doorway held tins and an old radio. Elliot set the photograph on the step and waited for a name to fall between them. There was a long silence, thin and watched. Then Arthur said, "William." The word landed and sat. Arthur turned and the door clicked shut. Elliot stood with the paper in his hand and the name in his mouth. He did not call it back. He walked to the mound and sat on the lip of the earth. He set the spade aside and pulled at tangled roots as if answers might come with work. He packed the tin into his satchel and smoothed the photograph before folding it into his pocket. A curtain twitched and a shadow moved across the window as if someone measured him. He began to untangle roots at the edge of plot 14. Each pull a small argument against forgetting. The village kept its distance, some watching as if waiting for news, others as if waiting for nothing. Elliot kept the photograph folded and warm in his pocket. A private map to somewhere he had not yet earned. The task had altered. He had come to tend a grave. Now he had a name that would not leave him. He worked his hands into the earth and felt the hill change under his palms, less ground than a book left open. The day would be slow and blunt. The first act would not finish the question. Elliot worked until his hands ached and the photograph sat like a small weight in his pocket. He returned to the porch at dusk, footsteps slow, the village quiet as if listening for a misstep. He knocked and waited without hurry. The door opened a fraction, then closed again. The gap like a breath held. Elliot left the photo on the step and stepped back, refusing to press. A neighbor crossed the road and spoke low to Elliot, voice small but sharp. She said Arthur had buried more than names, that some things in the village were sealed by habit and fear. Elliot listened, and the words made the photograph heavier in his pocket. He came early the next morning with a trowel and a question. Arthur stood at his gate and looked at him like an old soldier appraising a new recruit. The silent measure of years between them. Elliot did not ask straight away. He set the photograph on the gate and let the image sit where both could see. Arthur watched one long moment, then reached out and touched the paper, without folding it back into Elliot's hand. "You should not be here," he said, voice flat as winter flint. Elliot kept his face calm. He said he was only trying to help, that the village had a custom, and he would honor it. Arthur's jaw tightened. He stepped back into the shade of his doorway, and the light found the lines around his eyes. A neighbor muttered from a window. Michael's name rose like a dark thing, and the air shifted. Elliot pressed on with small facts, not accusations. He mentioned the roster and the years since plot 14 was touched. He said he had found the tin, that the photograph was in it. He watched Arthur's hands more than his face. Arthur's fingers trembled once, then steadied. He spat onto the path as if to rid himself of taste. Then he lifted his head and said the single name again. clearer this time. And then another line broke from him. He was my son. The words landed like stones thrown into a still pond. Voices paused in other houses. A woman set down a pan and listened. The dog at the lane's end lay flat and silent. Arthur did not cry, and he did not explain. He turned away and began to close the door, as if to shut the past inside with him. Elliot stepped forward and placed a hand on the threshold. He asked what had happened, and Arthur did not answer. Instead, Arthur moved his hands as if counting something that no one could see, fingers marking time. He said only that the war had taken what it wanted and given what it would, that some names must be kept in order or the world would tip. Elliot felt the conversation tilt into something larger than two men. The village was present now in a quiet, collective hold. He folded his hands around the photograph and thought of the boy's smile. He wanted a story with a start and an end, but the thing before him was a knot. Arthur shut the door halfway, leaving a slit of light. He did not ask Elliot to leave, and he did not invite him in. Elliot left with the name weighing him differently. He walked back to plot 14 with a new question burning. Why would a father say a name and then hide from the sound of it? Elliot waited until dusk thinned the village to quiet voices. He moved through Arthur's yard with care, because houses like this kept more than coats and plates. Arthur kept his back to the shed. Elliot eased the latch and slipped inside without a sound. The shed held oil tins and paper, crates stacked like small walls, lids nailed down with memory. Elliot found a wooden box under a tarp. It opened to brittle papers in a ribbon. He read dates and names. Then he found a receipt, stamped, signed, the signature like Arthur's. The paper was a train ticket from the night everyone said William vanished. Elliot's throat tightened. The signature made the story Arthur had kept in silence begin to tremble. He took the receipt to the porch and stood where steps met the gate. Arthur came out slow, like tide. Elliot laid the paper on the banister and waited for the man to name what it meant. Arthur gripped the wood as if to steady himself. He breathed, then said plainly, "He was my son." The word fell. Elliot felt pity before anger. He slid the receipt across the rail and said the stamp was clear. Arthur read and his hands shook. He said he had signed for passage. A voice rose from a window and a neighbor called about a lorry that night. It went slow and then turned away. People listened from doorways, drawn into a silence that was all the louder for being shared. Arthur's face moved through grief into something harder. He spoke of orders and of the work of keeping men safe by telling them where to go. Elliot pressed for fact. "Did you give an order?" he asked. Arthur did not answer with a paper trail. He answered with weight. He said he had ordered a withdrawal, that men moved when told, and that orders sometimes broke like loose stones. Elliot set the receipt face up so the station name showed, a small rectangle of ink that might anchor a man to a place. Someone in a doorway muttered, "Michael," the name of a man who had been Arthur's sergeant. Arthur read the stamp and ran a thumb along the ink as if he could smooth the truth away. He said he had seen engines and lights, that men moved in confusion, but he would not name the road. Elliot asked the boy's unit. Arthur stated the platoon in a low voice. Exact facts and the signature did not align, and Elliot felt the gap like a bruise. The village seemed to hold its breath. People listened like watchers at a post. Elliot wanted one clear lever, a single fact to pull. The receipt had changed the shape of the room. It suggested Arthur was not where he claimed, or that memory had turned traitor. Arthur sank onto a porch chair and folded like paper. He did not cry. He said only that he had loved a boy and failed him, and that his silence had been his shield. Elliot watched him crack open. The confession left the village raw, and a new question burned brighter than the old one, if Arthur was not at the line that night. Then who carried William away? Elliot slept badly and woke with the receipt heavy in his pocket. He walked to the village hall because questions that sat in the dark needed light. The hall smelled of paper and lacquer. Sarah met him at the door, a hand to the ledger shelf, face set like someone who had read too many lists. They worked side by side, fingers moving over columns, turning pages that crackled with memory, a name repeated across a thin page, figures of sums, and a neat notation that did not look like grief, but like administration. Resettlement allowance, Sarah said, the words falling like coins into a bowl. Elliot felt the floor tilt. He read the line again, the year, the entry beside Arthur Keene's name. The ledger showed a payment the month after William disappeared, a tidy entry like a closed account. He made a copy on the cheap photocopier, the machine coughing paper. He folded the sheet in his palm and kept the corner as if it were a breadcrumb. Michael arrived without hurry. He nodded to Sarah and peered at the paper with the slow appraisal of a man who had been in charge of others. His jacket was buttoned high, his hands folded like habits. Elliot put the photocopy between them. "Why was there money?" he asked. Michael did not answer fast. He said documents sometimes smoothed mistakes, that resettlement was a polite phrase for moving men and kin. Sarah lifted her chin. She said the ledger suggested William may have been relocated, not killed. The sentence hung across the room, and people in doorways leaned as if to hear better. Michael's jaw worked. He cleared his throat and said the army moved people for many reasons, and the paperwork did not tell the whole truth. He admitted nothing. He suggested caution. He looked at Arthur as if watching a man placed at the center of an old net. Arthur came down the hall steps slow, measured as if each footfall was a sum owing. He took the paper with a hand that trembled. He read the line until the letters blurred. Then he said, "I was paid." The words were small, both relief and wound. Elliot watched the old man fold the paper and hold it like a ledger of guilt. A neighbor in the doorway muttered that secrets had teeth, and Michael's face hardened as if he had felt the bite. Elliot pressed for detail. "Who arranged it?" he asked. "Who signed?" Michael named no one. He said people in authority made decisions in haste, and sometimes they left others to live with those choices. The villagers gathered closer, drawn by a noise worth listening to. Eyes moved like birds between the men. Elliot left the hall with a copy in his pocket and a new question that could not be folded away. If William had been rehoused, who held him apart, and why had the village agreed to let it be so? Elliot walked back to plot 14 with the ledger, heavy as a promise. And the hill waited like an answer that had not yet been given. He had not expected many. Word had spread by noon, slow as knitting. The green was fuller than Elliot remembered. Neighbors sat on low stools, hands folded like small pledges. Arthur stood by plot 14 with the sapling in a plain pot. He held it as if it were both burden and permission. Elliot offered the plant. Arthur took it with hands that did not tremble now. He dug the hole with a steady, deliberate motion, each push a small confession. A woman sang once under her breath, not loud, a line they all knew. People shifted closer, a ring without judgment, only attention. Arthur opened his palm and placed the photograph inside the earth with the roots. He set the sapling over the photo and pressed soil down in even measures. He reached for a candle from Elliot's hand and struck a match on the box. The flame caught, and Arthur held it like a small truth. He named William in a voice that was not loud, but long, the syllable carrying over the hill. He did not shout accusation. He did not plead. He said the name as if setting a table for an absent guest. An old man from the back stepped forward, his face furrowed like folded paper. He put his palm to his chest and said he had done something years ago to keep a father from leaving the village. He had traded a letter, he said, because he feared the war would rip Arthur beyond return. He said it plain and small, not a confession for pride, but an offering to balance a life. Michael's jaw tightened beside him, and then eased. Arthur did not rise to fury. He only looked at the old man, then at the sapling between his hands. Arthur pushed the candle into the soil, and the light steadied like a promise. He nodded once at the old man, and then at the gathered faces. A slow, measured yielding. He did not demand explanations, and none were offered. The village had held its silence like a wound. Now it unpicked its stitches together. Elliot felt something wash through him that was neither joy nor sorrow, but a simple kind of lightness. He touched the sapling's stem, and the plant answered with the quiet of living things. They stood a long time without speaking. When the low murmurs began again, they were softer, less sharp, more like people rearranging furniture in the heart. Arthur rose and brushed his trousers. He said he would tend the bush, that he would come without shame, that he would call the name again each year if the village wished. They agreed with small sounds, hands on chairs, cups set down. A child reached forward and laid a small stone at the base of the stem, a pebble like an anchor. Elliot folded his hands and felt the work ahead and the work behind him line up. The hill had been a ledger of silence. Now it kept a living thing instead. The rose would need care. The care would be public. That was the pact they made by the light of one candle and the name of one lost son. Sometimes the heaviest thing we carry isn't what we've lost, but what we've never allowed ourselves to remember. Arthur planted more than a rose that day. He planted permission. Permission to grieve, to speak, to finally let the light in. If this story stirred something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. And perhaps, in your own quiet way, consider what names you've been holding in silence. What would it mean to finally speak them aloud? Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.